This morning I'm very pleased to be joined by the Minister for Health Martin Foley and the Minister for Education and Deputy Premier James Merlino for some very important announcements. Some time ago we made it very clear that we would do everything we could to normalise this virus, to push beyond it, to get as close to normal living, normal activity as we could possibly achieve. That's always based on health advice, it's always based on science and the numbers of the day and trends that we see, numbers of people in hospital for instance. But having seen Omicron peak, having seen the numbers continue to fall over these last few weeks, the Minister has made a number of decisions under the process that's detailed in the new Act of Parliament, and I want to run through what the key features of those are, and then I'll throw to Martin and he can speak in more detail about the decisions he's made, and then James has some very important extension announcements of arrangements that we have running in our schools currently. But this is exactly what we said we would do. We would have rules on for not a moment longer than they were needed. And that's exactly what we've done. And despite some of the games and despite some of the kind of nonsense about this stuff, it is rational, it is about safety, it's about science, and it is about us doing exactly what we said we would do. Keep people safe, do everything we could to manage the very significant pressure in our health system, but also normalise this, push through a very difficult barrier to make this in every way as normal a year as possible. There's no real alternative. So what I'm very pleased to be able to confirm is that from 6 p.m. Friday the 18th, so tomorrow, density limits in hospitality and entertainment venues will be gone. So those density limits that have applied, that were put in place because of the Omicron and the sheer number of cases that we had, they go. QR check-in requirements will be removed for retail venues, schools, including childhood and early childhood education, so for employees and in many other workplaces. So in very basic terms, where the vaccinated economy is still on and it remains in place with a 2-dose rule, so to go to a restaurant or a pub you will need to check in. If you're going to the supermarket where you don't have to be vaccinated, you will not have to check in. That is sensible. That is what we're announcing today to come into effect from tomorrow. In terms of surveillance testing in a number of key industries, they'll no longer be compulsory. That'll be up to them. Hospital worker bubbles will be removed, but then they can still be used at the discretion of health services. They're in the best position to make those judgments. International arrivals will no longer need to obtain an international arrival permit through Services Victoria, and those coming from overseas, either returning to Australia or coming from overseas, who are not vaccinated, instead of having to do 14 days of quarantine, they'll only have to do 7. Beyond that, there are a whole range of other matters that I know are very important to people, like when will the advice change in relation to returning to the office? When will masks no longer need to be worn inside? The Minister can speak to his intentions, what he aims to achieve, and he and I look forward to being back here before next Friday, confirming those arrangements as well. We can't make those decisions, the Minister can't quite make those decisions yet, we just have to wait and see numbers continue to fall in terms of the number of people in hospitals, or at least if we want the trend to be maintained, but it's our aim to have those rules changed and the Minister making positive announcements to that end for next Friday. So what I've just run through and what the Minister, Martin, will now speak to is effective from tomorrow, and then hopefully we can go even further than that the following week, have the advice taken off in relation to returning to work, and have some changes to mask rules also. This is exactly what we said we would do. It is very important that we follow the advice. Yes, we are based in science and we're all about safety, but this is what we said we'd do. Push beyond this. As difficult as it's been, normalise it, live with it if you like. That has not been easy in recent months given the sheer volume of cases, and I will take this opportunity. We talk a lot about pressure in our health system, we talk a lot about these issues, but it's always appropriate to thank our nurses, our ambos, our doctors, the whole team who are doing an amazing job. These numbers are falling, but it still is a very significant challenge in our health system. and we're going to keep backing those professionals, those dedicated professionals, to do what they do best, and that is to care for people. But it's important to acknowledge just how challenging it's been these last 2 years, and certainly the last few months. So we're very, very grateful to them. Now, just finally, we are going to extend arrangements in relation to schools, and James will speak to that in just a moment. Getting our kids back in the classroom on day one of term one was very, very important to me, to parents, to students, to teachers and staff. That's what we've done. It's been a fantastic success, but only through a lot of hard work. And again, I thank teachers and staff, parents and students. Things have had to be done a bit differently, but school's back, and the results are just terrific. It's worked really, really well. We can be positive and optimistic about that, but it's important, I think, to keep that going. So James can speak to that in a moment. So now let's hear from Martin in a bit more detail about what he has determined under the new Act. Then James can speak about what's going to happen in schools for the rest of term one, and then we're happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Premier. So today is a positive day for the Victorian community. As the Premier indicated, since the Omicron wave hit us and peaked over January, we've taken steady, prudent, cautious steps to bring restrictions down, and each week when we forecasted the next step, we've delivered on those outcomes. And we've been able to do that because the Victorian people have been so good in both coming forward and getting those fully vaccinated arrangements, and we're right up there in the league leaders around the states and territories for third dose boosters. But of course there are still many, many more Victorians who are eligible for that booster, and we can continue this trend of positive news if everyone is fully vaccinated and up to date with those vaccines. But in regards to where we are at the moment, we've seen hospitalisation numbers fall, and now we are confident plateau, and we are also seeing the numbers of staff members on our hospitals, in both public and private hospitals, return in increasing numbers. That gives our hospitals and our public health team the confidence that we can take these next steps that the Premier's outlined to ease restrictions, as well as where we're heading in the next week or so. And just to give a bit of context to that, the removal of the density quotas, which were only DQ2 anyway, when we announced those on the 6th of January, our third dose vaccination rates were at 12.7% of the Victorian population. Today, they are running at 52.2%, and we keep steadily increasing that, and with hundreds of thousands of vaccine appointments available at our state clinics, with our pop-ups right across particularly vulnerable communities, our partnership with primary care, doctors and pharmacists. We continue to have many hundreds of thousands of vaccination opportunities available, and the way that we can continue this trend is to drive up those vaccination rates. At the same time, when we put the measures on dance floors, which we're now removing on the 10th of January, we had 818 people in hospital. That peaked a few weeks thereafter at over 1,200, and today we're sitting at 401. And what this has meant is that throughout January and into February, the load on our doctors, on our nurses, on treating those quite unwell people, both in our hospital system and hospital in the home, where we had sometimes significantly higher numbers than those of people being treated at home. That meant that we needed to take the measures that we did to ease the pressure, to look after those people, and to make sure that our public and our private hospitals could cope with that level of demand. And I want to thank our nurses, our doctors, our paramedics, our AMBOs, our allied health professionals, the executives, the cleaners, in fact the pathology teams, everyone that's been associated with the wonderful effort across both our public and private hospitals that have allowed us over the last few weeks to take these steady, progressive steps to return to living with COVID in the most appropriate way we can. It's also critically important, as the Chief Medical Officer for the Commonwealth has stressed on a number of occasions, that we recognise that this is not over, and that we recognise that there's every prospect come winter, according to our public health teams, that we might well see a resurgence of Omicron, or indeed a new variant of concern. So to make sure that we have the highest level of immunity and protection, that will make sure that we stay open, that will make sure that our hospitals are continually able to cope with demand, is through vaccinations. So I cannot stress enough the importance of those arrangements. And a key part of staying open goes to the transition we've made to having rapid antigen tests at the heart of our public health response, to identifying early any possible cases and taking those people out of chains of transmission quickly and their close contacts quickly, therefore helping us drive down these rates and allowing us to stay open. In relation to the next set of measures, the public health advice is pretty clear that we just need to see the next few days to see this trend stabilise and continue, and then we will be in position next week, next Friday, to look at lifting the mask requirements in office and related settings, and doing those arrangements in a careful, considered manner with the support of both business and our public health experts. And we want to make sure that the steps that we're taking today, lifting of the QR codes, maintaining the vaccinated economy status to protect both the people who work and visit those important venues, but equally drive visitations to and the economic recovery that we've seen, whilst at all times protecting our public and private health systems. I'll ask the Deputy Premier to come forward and talk about schools. Thanks.
Terrific, thanks Martin. So finally on schools and early childhood, and as Dan mentioned, we're really pleased with the start of school. The first 2.5 weeks of term one, students are loving being back at school. Our teachers, support staff, principals have done a brilliant job. Parents and carers are happy. Students are safe and schools are staying open, and that's exactly what we want to see. So I'm going to talk about three quick things. Firstly, on surveillance testing. The reason we introduced surveillance testing was really twofold. One, to give comfort and confidence to parents, to staff, and most importantly to students that our schools are safe. And secondly, to stop transmission. Identify cases early to make sure that we can not only stop transmission in schools, but stop transmission in the broader community as well. And that's exactly what has occurred. So we've had Burnett do some modelling over the first few weeks of school, and that modelling shows that with an assumption of 75% compliance, we've actually prevented more than 21,000 COVID-19 cases in our students. And Burnett have also extended that modelling through to the end of term one. So what if we do it for a further 6 weeks to get to the end of term one? And that modelling shows that will prevent a further 61,000 cases in students, 150,000 cases in the community, and around 400 hospital admissions. So for those reasons, today we're announcing that we're going to continue the surveillance testing. We'll provide a further 24 million rapid antigen tests to schools and early childhood settings. That's in addition to the 15.6 million we have already provided. So that's almost 40 million rats right through to our schools. So that's surveillance testing. The frequency will stay the same, so the recommendation will continue to be twice a week surveillance testing. The second thing is in regards to air purifiers. So we have already rolled out more than 51,000 air purifiers into all government schools and all low-fee non-government schools, as we promised to do. but at the same time we've had expert technical advice and thinking about what more do we need to do, if anything, as we head into the colder winter months. The advice is that we do need to do some more. Obviously, as we head into the colder months, windows in classrooms are going to be closed, so the ability to get the air changes, to get that natural ventilation will be reduced. So today we're announcing that a further 60,000 air purifiers will be distributed to government and low-fee non-government schools, and that will mean that all classrooms, so general purpose classrooms, art rooms, ICT, science labs, music rooms, all classrooms will receive an air purifier, and we'll get that done by June 1. So as we enter into winter, the comfort and confidence to school communities is that there'll be a further 60,000 air purifiers delivered. The final thing to mention on behalf of Minister Stitt, as Minister for Early Childhood, will continue and expand the opportunity for improving ventilation in early childhood settings, so a further $3.8 million in grants for eligible kindergarten and early childhood settings. So again, this is about providing confidence and comfort to our entire school communities. We've done a great job so far. I'm so proud of our school communities. Students are learning face to face, and that's where we want them to stay. We're all happy to answer questions.
Any questions?
Can you say why the working from home recommendation wasn't removed?
Well, we've got a very positive trend in terms of the number of people in hospital, but there's still significant numbers of people in hospital, and those decisions will be made hopefully and confirmed next week, and will come into effect not tomorrow but Friday next week. The point is well made though in your question, Chanel. It is a recommendation. There's not a rule. People have made their own decisions though within that framework not to come into the office, but hopefully that can change, particularly in relation to masks next Friday. And we aim, as a public service, we aim to have everybody back. It'll take a little bit of time, but everybody back on an average of about 3 days per week. That's what happened last time we were back to normal, before of course waves of this virus hit us. But again, these are not decisions that are made lightly. They've got to be done in a cautious way. They've got to be done carefully. It's our aim under the Act, though, I do stress. It'll be a matter for the Minister to satisfy himself that that's the right thing to do, but we aim to have those decisions made and confirmed and coming into operation Friday next week.
Is there a target set for where cases are coming down to over the next week to be able to unlock those?
Yeah, I don't think it's as hard and as fast as that. Obviously, the health system is well managed by the department, by all those clinicians who work incredibly hard every single day, and every patient's unique, every hospital's unique. You know, the trend is good, the trend is positive, but even with 450 odd patients in the system now, plus a lot of catch up to do and all the other pressures that the health system faces every single day, you'd never describe it as easy. But we aim, and we're confident that we'll be able to get to a situation next Friday where masks are off in the office and the advice changes. The advice is dropped. People will then be free, and in fact we'll be encouraging them to go back to the office.
Would it be fair to say that there would need to be some reversal in the current trend for those decisions not to be made next Friday? And also, will one of those decisions next week be indoor masks in all indoor settings or just office settings?
Well, again, let's wait and see how things unfold. We are signalling to you what we intend to do, what we aim to do, and what we think we'll be able to do. So it is looking positive. We'll have to wait a few days, and again, as you well know, the Act is very clear. These decisions are made by the Minister after he gets advice and talks to lots of different people. That's what we're aiming to do, and I'm confident that we will be able to do that, but we can't make that decision now. That needs to be made in a few days' time. But it was important, given that it's under active consideration and I think it's the likely outcome, it was important to mention it today because it's something that people are particularly interested in.
Does that apply to kids in schools as well, the mask?
I've already given you, I think, a fair sense of what we hope to achieve next week, but I'm not here to make those announcements, and we do have to be careful because they're not decisions that I make. They're decisions that well, no, and the minister, I don't know that the minister will be. Well, you can, but I think the answer will be probably the same. In that we're not here to make those announcements today. No, I haven't made an announcement about officers, Rich. I've said what we're hoping to do. Sorry. Oh, fine. If you like the same answer, then I'm more than happy for other ministers to give it to you.
Thanks, Richard. So as I indicated in my opening remarks, the trend that we've seen in the coming down of cases in hospital and the coming down of hospital in the home care has given our public health team the confidence that the arrangements we've had in place can continue to be eased. And we've announced some measures that will kick in around QR codes, density limits and a range of other international arrival measures to kick in from 6 o'clock tomorrow. So essentially in most venues right across the state there will essentially be no or very limited restrictions. When it comes to masks, indoor masks with various exceptions along the way, I've asked for and will continue to receive advice that points to a direction, and that direction is very positive, that if we continue this direction of change, that it would be appropriate next Friday to revisit the issue of masks coming off in office settings, and of course in the context of that, what does that mean for the wider application of masks? And it's only important now that we foreshadow that so Victorians are confident as to what's coming. For the past 4 or 5 weeks, we've stood here and said, next week we expect to do various easings of things as the Omicron wave comes down and cases stabilise. And we've delivered on each of those weeks, but it would not be prudent and it would not be sensible to predict what could happen in a week's time, because what we've certainly learned over the last 2 years is that this global pandemic has a degree of unpredictability about it. So we're confident in the steps that we're announcing today to take effect for tomorrow. We'll continue to consult, as I have been, with our public health officials, with our hospital sectors, public and private, with businesses and a range of other stakeholders, and I am confident that you will see us here again next week confirming the arrangements around masks.
Dangling the carrot today though for businesses that need to plan and obviously put measures in place to get their staff back. Can you give them a sense of what you're waiting for?
So I've been in consultation with business leaders, and I'm confident that they understand and support this direction, because it gives them what they're looking for, that predictability and certainty that they can start to plan for office and other workplace arrangements coming back. It's not just offices, we're also lifting the requirement for serial testing as an obligation on a whole raft of high-risk sectors, with the confidence that these businesses can now, over 2 years into this global pandemic, having learnt so much, put in place arrangements where they can maintain their own safety of their workforce and their clients and their business, because businesses want to stay open. They want to be safe. They want to make sure that these are the kind of steps that they can have in a predictable, safe manner. In my discussions that I've had with senior business leaders, this is precisely the kind of thing that they've asked for and that they're looking for, and I look forward to continuing those discussions and making sure that they're informed by the best public health advice. With the trends in place at the moment, I'm confident that you'll see us, as we've set out over the course of this year, each of the next steps to be carefully taken step by step, and that's why we're foreshadowing masks next week.
In your previous answer, in your previous preamble, you said that in considering the return to work mask rules in offices, you consider mask rules in all other
Broadly,
settings.
yes.
So is it fair to surmise that the decision next week will be around mask rules for all indoor settings? Is that what you intend to do, as the Premier said you intended to do
Well,
in office settings?
So, as the legislation sets out, I need to take careful, prudent public health advice and balance that against all the other implications, economic, social, mental health, cultural, as to how we continue on in responding to this global pandemic. The pandemic is not over. The pandemic, as the Chief Medical Officer has made clear at the Commonwealth level, they are predicting will make a comeback in winter. But what we can do is use the time between now and then to be prepared for that and to take sensible measures to make sure that we return to as COVID normal and as COVID safe arrangements as we possibly can. Masks will continue to have a role, but what we want to do is to make sure that it's proportionate, that it's only where necessary, and that it has the kind of public health and local workplace outcomes that we're seeking. And I'm confident with further data and further consultations over coming weeks that we can put in place arrangements that will stick. And I think business, and indeed the whole community, is looking for that certainty and predictability. That's what we've delivered over the course of 2022, and we'll continue to do so.
And what is that data? Where do the numbers need to get to, or what are you basing your decisions on so that people understand why not?
So it's the trends and it's the application of those trends in different settings. So we've got 401 cases in hospital. We've got, which is a steadying, it's bumped up a bit from yesterday, but the 7-day trend continues down. We've seen ICU cases continue to trend down. We've seen hospital in the home cases, which are quite still serious cases, continue to trend down. And we've seen the preparedness of the wider community, as the Deputy Premier pointed out, to do all the things they need to do to cut off change of transmissions, whether it be at schools, whether it be at corporate events, whether it be in workplaces, whether it be in the serial testing arrangements in high-risk sectors. All of those sectors now, 2 years in, are doing all the things they need to do to keep this trend going. And I'm confident that with the securing of, for the Victorian provision alone, of over 210 million rapid antigen tests through our system, whatever it is the Commonwealth's providing, and whatever it is that's provided at the market situation, that all of those steps will be in place to allow the broad ecology of things to keep us safe and keep us open. These are sensible measures, and I look forward to being back in the very near future to confirm those arrangements in a week's.
So we're not contact tracing at the moment. That doesn't mean we won't contact trace in the future. If we finished up with another variant, or there could be circumstances if you had a particularly challenging outbreak in a certain setting, you might use that data for contact tracing. But ultimately, it's just the simplest and easiest thing to do to validate that you are vaccinated and that you are allowed to be at the pub or in the restaurant. All of it. So if it's a vax economy setting where you have to be vaccinated, then you continue to check in. If it's a supermarket or the chemist where you do not need to be vaccinated in order to access those services, you don't have to check in. That's the simplest way to do it. Nothing's perfect, but that's the simplest way to do it. I should also mention, as we move towards next Friday, so these are all important decisions today, and they'll be welcomed, I'm sure. I know what everybody wants, though. They want to be able to take their mask off inside, and they want to be able to get back to normal working patterns, having people back at the office, or as many as possible for as much of the week as possible. We just have to wait a little bit longer. That's where we're headed. That's likely where we're going to finish up next Friday. And we're in very deep and important discussions with New South Wales to try, myself, the Minister, to try and make sure that our settings are as close as they can be. That sense of unity, that sense of consistency, I think has served us well right throughout this summer. And we're keen to keep that going. And I was speaking with Premier Purifiers just a couple of times this week. And I'll speak to him again next week, and hopefully we can have the rules pretty well across the eastern seaboard, or certainly for the two biggest states in the Commonwealth, as consistent as possible. I think that's good for the country. Because people have checked in for 2 years, frankly. They're used to doing it. We think that's the simplest thing. How long the vaccinated economy operates for, though, that's something that's under review as well. Well, if you're putting it to me that people haven't checked in literally hundreds of millions of times over the last 2 years, then I just think it's the simplest way to go, rather than changing things. So again, we could have gone the other way. I think the easiest thing to do is just to continue doing what people have been doing, and that's basically checking in.
Shouldn't the onus be on the government to give a very good reason why they should be tracking the movements of millions of people every day? Not just because they're a slightly more convenient option than checking into the service Victoria using the VAT certificate, but shouldn't there be a really compelling reason to continue QR coding if there is another way?
Yeah, and there are very clear tests within the Act, and the Minister has satisfied those, and that's why he's made the decision he's made. There was also changes made to the law last year in relation to the data security and integrity of all of that data. So I think we've got the strongest framework in the country, and that's not by accident. That's because we take these matters very, very seriously. It's just a matter of people have been doing this on literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of occasions. We think that's the easiest way to go. Will it be there forever? Will a vaccinated economy be there forever? No, it won't be. And as soon as we can make changes to again, further reduce the number of rules and the number of impacts on people's lives, we will. And that's the real answer to schools and every other setting, every other indoor setting. I think we've demonstrated really clearly that rules won't be on any longer than they need to be, but there has to be a strong basis for changing them. There is a process to go through. That's the process the Parliament gave us, and we'll work through that diligently and have more to say about indoor settings, hopefully beyond just offices, next week.
I think New South Wales wants to try and take a fair chunk of rules off by March 1, including QR code check-ins, potentially some regarding showing your vaccination status. So will you be looking for consistency when it comes to that by that time, March 1?
Well, obviously next Friday's before March 1, and we'll be having more to say next Friday, and we are doing everything we can. Well, hang on, we're doing everything we can to be as consistent as we can be with New South Wales, but they don't have a vaccinated economy operating. We do, so to that extent we won't be consistent, but in many other regards I think we're going to be able to achieve that. We are delivering that now. I think it's been a good thing, and we'll continue talking to New South Wales, and hopefully we'll be able to deliver a set of rules, or the removal of many rules that is absolutely consistent.
You don't think that puts us in a disadvantage with international tourists?
No.
That we have a vaccinated economy in New South Wales?
Yeah, but hang on, they're not getting into the country unless they're double dosed, which means they can. I don't think having to. Yeah, but hang on, I don't think having to check in is going to be a disincentive to people coming to the great state of Victoria. And at this stage, you'd have to do the same in New South Wales. Like, there's talk about them taking that off, but anyway, I think we've been able to achieve something very special, and that is, wherever possible, a unity between the rules and the approach in New South Wales and in Victoria. That's good for each state, and if it's good for each of the biggest states in the Commonwealth, it's good for the Commonwealth. Yeah, we'll have a bit more to say about support and trying to drive trade, trying to drive activity. That's not for today, but we're always working on that, and I think we will be able to have more to say about that soon. Sure. Yep, certainly. No, I'm always happy to come back. I did boldly predict that Rich would get the answer he got, and he did. But anyway, it's all good.
Just on the mandates, it's part of the thinking on when they will come off.
Yes.
The fact that because we probably aren't going to go with a 3-dose mandate, as you suggested yesterday.
Yes.
If you stay with the 2-dose mandate, at some point, most people have massively waned immunity if they've only got 2, so it's kind of irrelevant, a 2-dose mandate at some point. When does that point come?
Yeah. Well, that's not quite as simple as that. That's a perfectly logical construction, but that's not necessarily the way we would approach the issue. You're not wrong to say that. That's why getting a 3rd dose is really important. That's why we're out there pushing it as much as we can. Commonwealth Government's got a target advice. They've decided not to follow that advice. They're going to let people into the country in their millions with only 2 doses. That means us trying to insist on a 3rd brings up all sorts of challenging issues. We're going to keep pushing them, though, to get a 3rd dose. That is to say, we'll keep pushing Victorians, keep encouraging them, keep talking to the community and looking at innovative ways in which we can make it even easier to get a vaccine, to get that to be up to date, as Atagi put it. The future of the vaccinated economy, though, is about balance. It's about the proportional benefit that comes from it. It won't be there forever. we'll have more to say about that at the appropriate time.
Is the Commonwealth allowing double vaccinated people into the country the only reason you're now not pushing for a third dose mandate? Surely the awkwardness of sitting next to an international traveller who's only had 2 doses and you having had 3 is not the only reason you're not pushing for that. Is it because of the kind of community angle of mandate?
No, not at all. And in fact, we've got mandates on at the moment for a whole range of different groups within the community, and we don't rule out going further to mandate further third doses. The notion of a universal mandate, though, I think that's kind of rendered a bit challenging and not going to happen on the basis that tourists are being allowed in without that. And I don't think it's a simple matter of someone, as I said yesterday, peering through the window of the restaurant, watching someone from another country able to sit there and eat their steak and chips and drink a wonderful glass of Victorian wine, but they're not. But as a local, they're not allowed in. That doesn't make any sense. And again, who gets into the country? That's not a matter for us. That's a matter for the Commonwealth. They've made that decision. And again, I'm not being critical of them. They obviously thought long and hard about this, and perhaps I think I've heard them talk about the fact that there's not the booster access in other parts of the world. I don't know about that, but still, we don't control the borders. We don't issue visas or passports. That's a matter for the Commonwealth. We're just reacting to that and trying to be as logical, trying to get back to normal as fast as we can, and not be in any way discouraging, the jobs, the activity, the confidence, the recovery that is so important.
So
someone wanted something from James, or
just confirming
sure.
why you're speaking about third dose mandate.
Yep.
So our vaxxed economy, you're not envisaging that at any point going to a 3-dose mandate. It's just going to stay at 2, and then people are just recommended to get a 3rd and 4th and 5th.
As I said yesterday, I think that's where we find ourselves, based on the fact that we're going to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of tourists and other visitors from around the world moving back and forth around our community and economy and around the nation, and they're only going to have 2 in order to get in. So that kind of answers that question. Of course, another variant comes. Winter's really challenging, for instance. I'm not ruling things out, but at this stage, no. But also make the point, the vaccinated economy, as it is now, with 2 doses, so that's 93% can go to the pub and 7% can't, that won't be there forever. It'll be there for so long as it serves a useful purpose, and that's about keeping people safe. And I think there is some comfort that people take from knowing that if you're out and about in these sort of settings where you're there for a protracted period of time, you are surrounded by people who, just like you, have made the right decision, not just for themselves, but for all of us. They've gone and had a first dose and a second dose, and I hope are booked in for a third.
Where you'd previously said that the vaxxed economy would be in place for what you envisaged was all of 2022.
And it might be, but all I'm saying is it's been.
Today maybe that is there an indication or a feeling that maybe that's not going to be the case?
No, I'm sorry if I've given you that impression. I've been pretty consistent in very broad terms and quite specifically. Rules will be on for not one moment longer than they need to be. We have very few rules now. From 6 o'clock tomorrow night, there'll be even less. From next Friday, hopefully, we'll be able to reduce the rules even further to the point where there really won't be any, other than go and get vaccinated for yourself, for every Victorian, and most especially for our nurses and ambos and doctors. Take some pressure off them. If you're vaccinated, if you're boosted, if you're up to date and you've had 3 shots, then you are at a much reduced risk of finishing up in hospital and taking the place of somebody who can't choose not to be in hospital, someone who has an accident, someone who needs cancer care, someone who has a stroke or a heart attack, all of those things. Plus our health team, they're amazing people, and they've had a very, very difficult 2 years. None of us should be doing anything to make their job harder. And if you can take the chance to make their job just a little easier by getting vaccinated, why wouldn't you do that? They're safe, they're free, they're effective, they are critical. So please, it's never been easier. There are literally hundreds of thousands of appointments, whether it be appointments for kids, 5 to 11, or 3rd dose appointments, and even if you've been sitting on the fence for all this last 12 months, but you've decided to get vaccinated, there's even 1st dose appointments available. Please go and get vaccinated. It's so important for all of us.
Before I ask Mr. Moore, I just want to ask you about this incident that's emerged regarding ambulance delays by the US. The incident at Cowes where a man died while waiting for
Well, the minister can.
these cases?
Sure. Well, the minister can speak to those investments. I want to take the opportunity to send my best wishes and my deepest condolences to the Grant family. This is obviously a very, very difficult time for them. This matter has been reviewed by Ambulance Victoria, and where appropriate, I'm certain the coroner will probably be part of this process if they haven't already. But yes, this is a very difficult time for the family, very difficult, and I send my best wishes to them. The Minister can speak about the massive investments we've made in this space. It's very important. Obviously, pre-pandemic, we had the best response times since response times were recorded. But this global pandemic has made the job of our AMBOs really, really tough. They're all working as hard as they can, though, and any time that a patient dies, I know that's carried by our paramedics. That's something that they have to deal with, as well as, of course, family. They're part of that as well, and they feel it very, very heavily. We have supported our ambulance service. We'll continue to do that. But this global event, this pandemic, and the sheer volume of people who've needed an ambulance has sadly put very significant pressure on the system. But to talk more about what we've done and what we will continue to do, I'm happy to throw to the Health and Ambulance Services Minister.
Thanks, Premier. I'd join with you in offering my deep condolences to the family concerned, and the support that Ambulance Victoria, or indeed any of us, can lend in this tragic time is certainly there. I understand Ambulance Victoria have reached out to the family, and those conversations are continuing. In regards to what I can and can't say, given that there are and will no doubt be further inquiries as to the particular circumstances of this tragic case on Phillip Island, what I can say is that, as I understand it, the issue wasn't so much the dispatch of the ambulance once it was dispatched. The paramedics were there, indeed other volunteers in the nearby community were there once the call was distributed. The issue goes to, at the ESTA end of things, how did the call make its way through? It would not be appropriate for me to publicly comment whilst those investigations are underway, whilst that family is grieving, and whilst the specific circumstances are still under review. But what I can say is that when it comes to Ambulance Victoria, 2 Fridays ago we got up and pointed to the fact that in 2021 it was a record year of ambulance recruitment of paramedics, that we had brought forward into 2022 a further several hundred paramedics being brought on as part of a $1.4 billion health investment, with substantial amounts of that, hundreds of millions of dollars, going into new stations, more paramedics and better support services, whilst at the same time recognising that those paramedics had been dealing with the most difficult of circumstances in living memory in the ambulance service. In regards to ESTA, whether it's the former Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton undertaking his review, together with other inquiries by the Inspector General of Emergency Management, those reviews have continuing and are leading to changes at the moment, where we've seen more staff brought on. Clearly, as they are trained, you just can't walk in and start answering calls. There are training arrangements in place that are being fast-tracked. There's support from other agencies, and I'm confident that the measures that are being put in place at ESTA are continuing to address those circumstances to allow our paramedics, our fire, rescue services and our police attend these services as soon as they possibly can.
So just to be clear, are you saying there was a mistake with ESTA as to how that call was processed?
I beg your pardon?
Was there a mistake with ESTA as to how that call was processed that delayed the case many?
Well, I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that there are investigations underway, and what we need to do is to allow those investigations to establish precisely what happened and make any learnings that will come from that. But I'm not aware of the particular circumstances, nor should I be whilst those independent investigations are underway, and I look forward to those investigations by Ambulance Victoria, by ESTA and by the oversight agencies to provide that family with the certainty that they're looking for, and to provide all Victorians with the reassurance that we do have a world-class ambulance service here in Victoria.
If we're going to foreshadow a worse flu season, a possible another wave, what are we going to do, or what are you going to do with the government to make sure that people don't die waiting for ambulances, so that we have enough trained staff in that system to handle that situation?
That's why we're recruiting more emergency call takers. That's why we're building more ambulance stations. That's why we're recruiting hundreds more paramedics, and that's why we're delivering increased support for them and continuing to deliver them the support they need. Over the last 2 years, particularly during Omicron, AMBOs have to work on, and the paramedics have to work on the basis that everyone they are approaching is a potential COVID case. That slows down their responses when they have to go out in full PPE, decontaminate their vehicles after each visit, whilst at the same time dealing with similar processes at the emergency department end of things. And that's why it's so important that we support our paramedics and our emergency departments by only calling 000 in an emergency, and if it's not an emergency, call Nurse on Call, call the Commonwealth's COVID advice line, refer to your local primary healthcare providers. In regards to the ESTA side of things, we've already seen more staff brought in through the emergency services portfolio, and I'm confident that the work that they are putting in will have us prepared for what will be a challenging winter. And again, as the Premier indicated, the best thing you can do to assist our paramedics, to assist our call takers, to assist our emergency departments is for you to be prepared for winter, and that means being up to date with your vaccinations, and for 93% of Victorians that means being triple vaccinated.
Question from the Premier, if I could. Premier,
I'll get to that.
Premier, in the past couple of weeks, hundreds of Australians have died in aged
But
care.
you will get a chance.
Hundreds of Australians have died in aged care, including in Victoria. Does
Yep.
the state accept any responsibility for that, or is that a federal government matter? The main amount of deaths have been in aged care.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily. I didn't come here today to be offering opinions on who's responsible for that. But so I just hope. No. Sure. I'm happy to answer the question, but I just wanted to make the point very clearly that I'm not here to be having a go at any other government, right? So you've asked me a question. I'm happy to answer it. We don't run. And we have nothing to do with the operations of private aged care. That is regulated by the Commonwealth. It is funded by the Commonwealth. Where we can provide support, where we're asked to provide support, then from a public health point of view, of course we do. And there are many people, I haven't got a number for you, but I expect it is a significant number of residents out of aged care who are in hospital beds, public hospital beds at the moment. So I suppose to that extent we are responsible for their care. They're not in their home though, they've come to hospital. I'm not here to allocate or apportion blame or to be attacking other governments. I'm just making the factual point. We don't run private sector aged care, whether it's a denominational, church and charitable, not-for-profit or for-profit residential aged care. That's run by others. We have, however, the biggest presence in that market, public sector aged care. We haven't privatised, as others wanted to. We've retained those beds, and I'm very pleased to say we've seen very, very few COVID cases there.
Has the state
And I think ratios, for instance, are one important part of that.
Do you think then governments and the sector have failed to learn the lessons in the last 2 years to be prepared for Omicron in aged
Oh, look, I'm not here to make those sort of judgments. They'd be judgments for others to make, like the Commonwealth Government. You'd have to look at all the evidence, you'd have to look at all the experience, you'd have to look at the data, not just in Victoria, but across the board. But I will again just make the point, we had a Royal Commission into this sector We know and understand there are big problems in private sector residential aged care. I can't fix them because it's not part of our government, it's not part of our remit. If it were, then I would suggest to you it would look like public sector aged care, where there are minimum staffing requirements. So we're in this market, and our aged care system looks very, very different to that is the state public sector, state government aged care sector looks very different to the private sector. And I'm grateful to all those staff for the amazing job they've done. Those who work for us, they've done an amazing job, and I'm sure everybody across the sector, regardless of who pays your wages, they're all about the best care for residents. But there are issues in private sector aged care. There's no point hiding from that. We had a whole Royal Commission into it.
As Education Minister, would you be hoping that next week, as well as officers' masks come off in schools?
Oh, look, on that question answered comprehensively by the Premier and Martin as the Minister for Health, and ultimately it's Martin's call based on the advice that he receives under the legislation. I think they've answered it comprehensively. The only other thing I'd add is that, you know, you look at our approach right throughout this pandemic, incremental easings, seeing what the impact of that has been. The critical thing for me, the critical thing for every parent in Victoria, is to get our kids back at school. We know that face masks make a huge difference. It's a small inconvenience, but it provides a lot of confidence and a lot of public health benefits. So, you know, I fully support the process Martin is going through, and looking firstly at what can we do in offices and then beyond that, but that'll be subject to the advice that Martin receives.
Do you agree with I think there's a minority of parents and a minority of experts who say that kids wearing masks kind of ruins their socialisation, harms their mental health, doesn't have an effect on their well-being? Do you agree with that? Obviously it has a health
It's got a significant public health benefit. There's a recognition from public health that, you know, for smaller kids, for children in specialist settings, that's why we made the decision that it's, you know, from grade 3 and above. But my experience with my own children, visiting schools right across the state, it's common practice now for kids, and importantly, it's in the classroom. When they're out in the yard, when they're out in the open air, there's no masks on for our students. On the broader question of mental health and well-being, the pandemic as a whole has had an impact on our kids, and that's exactly why we're investing in mental health practitioners. We've got the mental health fund, $200 million fund rolling out. We put well-being at the centre of what our schools are doing. So we know that it has had a broader impact, but in terms of the wearing of face masks, I wouldn't agree with that.